The desert stretched endlessly, a scorched wasteland under the burning Nevada sun. 5 friends, Jake, Rachel, Miguel, Tara, and Brandon, were on a road trip, chasing the thrill of ghost towns and forgotten highways. They had been driving for hours when they spotted the hand-painted sign, "Welcome to Redwater, home of the Harvest Festival." At first, it looked like one of those quirky small towns you only stumble across by accident. Colorful paper lanterns dangled across dusty streets, and smiling locals waved as the group drove in. The whole town seemed too alive for being in the middle of nowhere. Rachel leaned forward from the backseat. Finally, somewhere with actual people. I was starting to think this road trip was just endless gas stations and cactus. Brandon chuckled. Relax. Small towns like this always have the best food. Probably pie. But Miguel, staring out the window, frowned. You guys don't find it weird? Out here, in the middle of the desert, this feels staged. The car rolled into the town square, where dozens of townsfolk stood waiting. Men, women, even children, all grinning wide, their teeth just a little too straight, too white. They clapped and cheered as though they'd been expecting the group. An elderly woman stepped forward, her eyes bright, her hands trembling with excitement. "Welcome, traveler! You've arrived just in time for our annual Harvest Festival." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Lucky us." The old woman's smile deepened, stretching unnaturally across her wrinkled face. "Very lucky indeed." That night, the group was seated at a massive banquet table in the center of town. Lanterns lit the night sky. Music played, violins, flutes, and drums, but the tunes sounded off like children trying to mimic melodies. They didn't quite understand. The food arrived: roasted meats, vegetables, pies. It all looked delicious, but Brandon froze mid-bite. "This steak," he said, chewing slowly, "tastes weird." Miguel leaned closer, whispering, "That's not beef." Rachel rolled her eyes. "Don't start, Miguel." But then she noticed the way one of the townsfolks, a tall, gaunt man, was staring at her. Not casually, not politely. He was licking his lips, his pupils dilated, his fingers twitching against the edge of the table. Suddenly, the music stopped. Silence fell. Every single villager turned their head at once, their grins stretching wider, their eyes glinting in the firelight. That the old woman stood, lifting her arms. "The harvest begins." It happened so fast. One of the children at the table leapt forward, its skin splitting down the middle like rotten fruit. Beneath, a slick, sinewy creature unfolded, bones cracking as it tore free from its human disguise. Its mouth stretched wider than any human jaw should, lined with jagged, yellowed teeth. Rachel screamed as the thing lunged across the table, sinking its teeth into a villager, not an outsider, but one of their own. Flesh tore, blood sprayed across the white tablecloth. The child feasted noisily, ripping chunks of meat from the screaming body as the others clapped in rhythm, chanting in some guttural, inhuman tongue. Tara gagged, stumbling back from the table, but before she could move, one of the gaunt men peeled the skin from his face with a sickening rip. His real head emerged, elongated, gray, pulsating with veins. His eyes were hollow pits, black and endless. The others followed. Skins split, torn, discarded like cheap costumes, human masks fell to the sand, leaving behind a circle of nightmare creatures. Their bodies were twisted, their ribs jutting out like jagged armor, their hands ending in long, talon-like claws. They weren't pretending anymore. The friends shoving through the crowd as the chanting grew louder. Behind them, the creatures screamed, a shrill, high-pitched sound that echoed across the desert night. Dot! Jake grabbed Rachel's arm. Run. Don't stop. But as they rounded the corner of a darkened alley, Brandon slipped. Something yanked him off his feet with inhuman strength. The others turned just in time to see a claw punch through his stomach, lifting him into the air. His scream was wet, cut short as the creature bit into his face, ripping away his cheek in a spray of blood. Brandon's body convulsed, his intestines spilling out like coiled snakes onto the dirt. The creature slurped greedily, stuffing the entrails into its mouth while the others howled in approval. Rachel sobbed, We can't leave him." Miguel yanked her forward, his voice trembling. "He's gone. Move." But Rachel couldn't look away. Brandon's lifeless body was dropped to the ground, his skin already being peeled from bone as two creatures fought over the scraps. His eyes, glassy and wide, stared blankly into the night. The harvest had only just begun. Rachel's lungs burned as she sprinted down the dirt road, the night sky above thick with clouds that swallowed the moon. Her screams blended with panicked sobbing and Miguel's harsh breathing. Jake led the way, his flashlight beam bouncing wildly, slicing through the endless rows of wooden shacks that seemed to multiply with every step. The town was alive, shifting around them, as if the buildings themselves were breathing. Behind them came the sounds of the creature's wet slaps, of taloned feet against sand, guttural shrieks that dug into the brain like nails on glass. And then the chanting began again, carried on the wind. Guttural syllables that rattled bones and froze blood. The townsfolk, those who had not yet shed their skins, were standing in doorways, their smiles fixed, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. None of them moved to help. Rachel tripped, skidding across the dirt, her palms scraping raw. Jake grabbed her arm, yanking her to her feet, but as she rose, something darted from the shadows. A clawed hand snatched her by the hair and yanked her backwards with monstrous strength. Her scream was shrill, ragged. She was dragged across the ground, her nails clawing at the sand until they tore clean off, blood smearing the earth in streaks. "Rachel!" Jake roared, lunging for her. But the creature pulled her into a narrow alley, its elongated body folding and contorting like a spider dragging prey into its web. Miguel and Tara froze, the sight so grotesque that their legs threatened to buckle. Inside the alley, Rachel kicked wildly, her boots slamming into the creature's rib cage with hollow thuds. Its skin rippled, slick and glistening in the moonlight, like raw muscles stretched too tight over broken bones. It hissed, opening its mouth wide enough that its jaw cracked, unhinged, strings of saliva dangling. The stench of rot poured from its throat. It pinned her against the wall, its claws stabbing through her shoulders and into the wood, crucifying her there. Rachel shrieked, blood spurting in hot arcs down her arms. She writhed, but every movement only tore her flesh further. Her vision blurred as the creature leaned in, dragging its tongue slowly across her face, leaving a burning slime in its wake. Her tears mixed with the foul saliva dripping from her chin. Please, please don't. Her plea was cut short as the creature rammed its talons into her abdomen. A wet, tearing sound filled the alley. She gasped, her mouth flooding with coppery blood. The monster pulled its claws upward, slicing her stomach open in a single savage motion. Her insides spilled out in a steaming cascade, intestines unraveling like rope, splattering onto the dirt with sickening plops. The heat rose in the cool desert air, steam curling from the fresh gore. Rachel's scream turned into a choking gurgle as her body convulsed. Her eyes bulged with shock as the creature plunged its face into her open cavity, rooting around like a hog at slaughter. It slurped noisily, pulling free handfuls of dripping entrails, stuffing them into its maw. The sound of cartilage snapping and flesh tearing echoed, grotesque and rhythmic. Jake charged into the alley, swinging a broken plank of wood he'd grabbed from the street. He smashed it across the creature's skull with a dull crack. The beast howled, jerking back from Rachel's twitching body, blood and shredded organs dangling from its jaws. For a moment, Jake thought he'd stunned it, but then its hollow eyes locked onto him, and it smiled, blood bubbling between its teeth. Rachel was still alive, barely, her body pinned and mutilated. Her trembling hands tried weakly to push her guts back inside, as if denial alone could undo the horror. She whimpered, her voice a broken rasp. JJ. He reached for her, his face twisted with anguish, but the creature moved faster, with a blur of motion. It ripped her heart straight from her chest, snapping ribs like dry twigs. Rachel's body jerked violently, her scream cut off mid-breath. Blood exploded outward, coating Jake in a crimson spray. The creature raised her, heart high, still twitching in its claw, and sank its teeth into it with savage delight. A fresh gush of blood poured down its chin, pattering onto Rachel's slack, lifeless face. Her glassy eyes stared at nothing, her mouth frozen mid-plea. Jake staggered back, gagging on bile and grief. You fucking monster. The alley walls seemed to pulse with laughter as more shadows shifted at the edges. More of the skinwalkers crept closer, their bodies writhing, unfolding grotesquely from their discarded skins. They moved in jerks, bones snapping and reconfiguring, as though their bodies were never meant to be still. Miguel and Tara screamed for Jake from the street, but he couldn't move, couldn't breathe. His friend lay gutted and crucified against the wall, her insides a feast for the thing now licking its claws clean. The stench of iron and rot was suffocating. Then, with deliberate cruelty, the monster reached up and tore Rachel's face clean off. Skin peeled with a sickening rip, dangling like a fleshy mask. It draped it across its own skull, pressing it into place. For an instant, Rachel's familiar face looked back at Jake, except stretched tight over a skull too long. Her mouth warped into a gory grin. The creature spoke in a voice that was almost hers, twisted and layered with something inhuman. "Run, Jake. Run before I wear you too." Jake screamed, and the desert echoed back. Miguel's legs ached, but fear drove him faster than he had ever run in his life. He dragged Tara along the winding dirt paths, his eyes darting to every shifting shadow, every flicker of movement in the corner of his vision. Behind them came Jake, stumbling, half crazed, his body drenched in Rachel's blood. None of them spoke. Words were useless now. The only sound was the pounding of their hearts and the unholy wailing that rose from the town like a funeral hymn. The shacks had begun to twist. There would groaning, nails screeching free as walls bent and warped, doors opened and slammed on their own, and through every crooked window glared faces thin, pale, and peeling. The townsfolk had shed their skins completely. Their bodies were slick, raw muscle, veins pulsing, eyes wide and lidless. They smiled with rows of blackened teeth as the three survivors raced past. Miguel pulled Tara into a barn at the edge of town, slamming the door behind them. Dust exploded into the air, choking them both. The barn was stacked with broken tools, rusted saws, and heaps of animal bones scattered like discarded toys. The stench was unbearable. Every rib, every skull had been gnawed clean, teeth marks etched deep into the bone. Jake staggered in, clutching a broken length of pipe like it was his only salvation. His eyes were wild, his face drained of humanity. "We can't stay here," Tara whispered, trembling so violently she could barely stand. But before Miguel could answer, the barn door shuddered. Something pressed against it, slowly, deliberately. The wood creaked and cracked as claws scraped down its surface. "Quiet," Miguel hissed, motioning them toward the far corner. He crouched low, gripping a rusted hatchet he'd found half-bayed under straw. His knuckles turned white as the scratching grew louder. Then came silence. Complete, suffocating silence. Tara's breathing quickened, a desperate staccato in the gloom. Miguel pressed a hand to her mouth, but she shoved it away. "It's gone," she whispered. The roof split open. The creature dropped down in a blur of muscle and claws, landing in the hay with a wet thud. It rose to its full height narrowly. 8 feet, its limbs grotesquely long, its spine arched and jagged like broken glass beneath skin. Its chest pulsed as though something crawled beneath it. The thing grinned, revealing teeth sharpened to needles, each one caked with gore. Miguel didn't hesitate. He swung the hatchet with all his strength, burying it into the beast's side. Flesh tore, black-red blood spraying across his arms and face. The creature shrieked, a sound like knives shrieking against steel. It staggered, then its claws lashed out, catching Miguel across the chest. The impact hurled him into the far wall. He hit so hard the wood splintered. His scream was muffled by blood as his ribs cracked inward. He slid down the wall, coughing, red froth. The creature stalked toward him slowly, savoring every second. Jake lunged from the side, driving his pipe through the beast's shoulder. The metal punctured deep, sizzling in the flesh like acid. The monster roared, spinning and backhanding Jake so hard his jaw dislocated with a sickening crack. He flew across the barn and crumpled, dazed. That left Miguel. The creature towered over him, drool dripping onto his face. Its claws dragged lazily across his chest, slicing shallow lines that bled instantly. Miguel raised the hatchet again, but his strength was gone. He swung weakly, and the beast caught his wrist, snapping it with a single squeeze. The bone burst through skin, white jutting against crimson. Miguel howled, his vision exploding with white-hot pain. The monster leaned down, inhaling the scent of his blood. Its tongue, long and split like a serpent's, slithered across his broken chest. Then, with terrifying speed, it plunged its claws into his abdomen and dragged them downward. His stomach split open like a ripe fruit, spilling loops of intestines across his lap. He convulsed, screaming so loudly his voice cracked into silence. The creature grabbed his intestines in handfuls, pulling them free, winding them around its arms like ropes. Miguel gagged, his body jerking violently, blood pouring in waves. The beast tightened the loops until his organs snapped weightly, chunks dropping into the hay. The smell of iron and bile filled the barn. Miguel's eyes rolled back, but the creature wasn't done. It bent low and bit into his exposed stomach, ripping free a chunk of flesh and muscle. It chewed loudly, smacking its lips, blood drooling from its mouth. Miguel shrieked, the sound ragged and broken. Then came the worst. The creature dug both hands into his rib cage and pulled outward. Bone cracked, splintered, snapped. His chest cavity burst open in a spray of gore, his heart and lungs quivering inside. The monster shoved its face in and devoured them raw. The sound was obscene wet crunches, deep, sucking gulps. Miguel's body twitched, then went limp, his head slumping forward. Blood sprayed so thick it painted the walls, dripping down beams and soaking into straw. Tara covered her mouth, sobbing silently, watching the man she loved reduced to meat. Jake crawled across the floor, groaning, eyes wide with despair. The creature lifted Miguel's heart high, blood dripping from its claws, and roared into the night. Other voices answered, dozens of them, shrieks and howls that rattled the air. The town was alive with monsters now. Tara fell to her knees, trembling. Jake stared at Miguel isan le kuganabura kodapusu, his soul breaking. One by one, the barns. Windows filled with glowing eyes. There would be no escape. Tara's scream was muffled by her own trembling hands. She crouched low in the corner of the barn. Miguel's shredded remains sprawled only feet away. His open chest cavity steamed in the cool desert night. Ribs cracked wide like broken gates. Blood dripped from the rafters, painting her hair, running down her cheeks in hot rivulets. The creature licked its claws, savoring every drop, then turned its hollow, lidless eyes toward her. Jake groaned somewhere behind her, dragging his ruined jaw back into place with a sound like tearing leather. He was barely clinging to life, yet his gaze locked on Tara Wild, terrified and defeated. Neither of them could stop what was coming. The monster stepped closer. Each footfall left wet, sticky prints on the hay, black-red blood oozing between its toes. It tilted its head as though studying her, savoring her terror. Tara pressed herself against the wall, splinters stabbing her back. Her breath came in ragged gasps, and the air reeked of iron and rotting meat. "Please," she whispered. Her voice cracked, brittle and useless. The creature smiled wider dot in a blur. It was on her, one claw wrapped around her throat, pinning her against the wall. Her feet kicked helplessly, scraping grooves in the wood. Its grip tightened. Bones creaked in her neck. She clawed at its arm, nails ripping skin but instead of bleeding. A black tar seeped from the wounds, smoking as it touched her flesh. Her fingers blistered instantly, the skin bubbling, she shrieked in agony. The creature tilted her head to the side, studying her veins throbbing in her neck. Then it bit. Its teeth sank deep, crunching through muscle and artery. Hot blood erupted, spraying across its face, soaking her torn shirt. Tara screamed as the monster drank, slurping greedily, blood pouring down her chest in rivers. It sucked until her face went pale, her body twitching violently in its grip. Then, with a savage jerk, it tore free, ripping a chunk of flesh the size of a fist from her throat. Her scream gurgled. Drowned in her own blood, she thrashed, clawing at the air as crimson fountains sprayed across the walls. The creature dropped her to the floor, where she writhed, choking, her hands clutching the mangled hole in her neck. It crouched over her, claws digging into her stomach. With one brutal motion, it dragged downward, splitting her open from sternum to pelvis. Blood cascaded out, pooling beneath her, soaking into straw that turned black with gore. Her intestines spilled in coils, steaming in the barn's cool air. She tried to shove them back in with trembling hands, whimpering, but they slid through her fingers like slippery ropes. The monster laughed a horrible, rattling sound that seemed to echo from everywhere at once. It scooped up handfuls of Tara's organs, wrapping them around her neck like grotesque jewelry. She sobbed weakly, her voice bubbling with blood. Then it gripped her ribcage. Slowly, deliberately, it began to pull. Bones creaked, splintered. Her body convulsed as the pressure built. With a deafening snap, her ribcage tore wide open, exposing her beating heart, pumping frantically in its cage of blood. She stared down, wide-eyed, as if refusing to believe her own body had betrayed her. The monster's tongue slithered forward, wet and forked, sliding across her exposed heart. Then it sank its teeth in and bit down. The heart burst, spraying a final jet of blood across her face. Her body spasmed violently, then went limp, eyes frozen wide in eternal terror. Jake watched it all, unable to move, his broken jaw hanging loose. Tears streaked his blood-stained cheeks. He wanted to scream her name, but only a guttural croak escaped. The creature ripped Tara's heart free and devoured it in 2 crunching bites. It then reached back into her hollowed chest and tore out her lungs, flinging them to the floor with a wet slap. Her corpse was unrecognizable, a shredded husk, ribs split wide like jagged wings. The barn had gone silent again. Only the drip of blood and the creature's labored breathing filled the Jake crawled backward, dragging himself through gore-scot straw. He slipped, his hands sinking into Tara's spilled intestines. He gagged, bile mixing with the blood already flooding his mouth. The creature turned toward him, its face dripping crimson, its eyes glowing faintly in the shadows. Jake's chest tightened. He realized, with a cold, final certainty, that he was next. It stepped over Tara's mangled corpse, her lifeless eyes staring upward into the rafters. Her blood ran down the boards in rivers, seeping into the ground like the desert itself was drinking it. Jake pressed his back to the barn wall, shaking uncontrollably. His broken jaw trembled as he whispered, "Please, not me." The creature crouched low, claws scraping the floor, and let out a hiss that smelled of rot and death. It began to advance. Jake knew there was no mercy here, no escape, only the same fate as Tara, Miguel, and Rachel before him. The shadows outside the barn quivered as more glowing eyes appeared, dozens of them. The others had come to watch. Jake's final scream tore through the night. Jake's scream broke into ragged sobs, his ruined jaw flapping loosely as blood bubbled from his mouth. He dragged himself backward until his spine pressed into the splintered barn wall. The stench of Tara's opened corpse hung thick in the air, her blood soaking into the straw beneath him, still steaming. He could feel it soaking through his jeans. Sticky and warm, the creature towered above him, its long limbs contorted at impossible angles, its skin stretched, taut like cracked parchment, veins crawling underneath. Its eyes burned with faint yellow light, hollow and endless, like desert fires with no smoke. The claws glistened wet, painted in layers of gore from all four of his friends. It crouched low, bringing its face inches from Jake's. Its teeth were jagged shards, mismatched and broken, but strong enough to tear steel. They still dripped with Tara's heartblood, thick and stringy. Jake gagged on the smell. His breath came in frantic, shallow bursts. "Please," he mouthed again, voice shattered. His jaw clacked against itself like loose bones. The creature tilted its head in mock curiosity, then ran its forked tongue slowly along the edge of his jawline, tasting his fear. The tongue left blistered streaks where it touched, skin sizzling like it had been pressed to hot metal. Jake shrieked, clawing at his own face as smoke rose from the burns. With sudden violence, the monster seized his jaw with one claw and the top of his skull with another. Jake thrashed wildly, his legs kicking against the straw, his nails tearing into its arm. It didn't matter. The sound came first, the horrible pop of his jawbone dislocating, tendons snapping like guitar strings. Then came the rip-dot with a single, wrenching motion. The creature tore his jaw clean off. Bones splintered, flesh tore, a fountain of blood sprayed across the wall in an arc. Jake's scream was nothing but a wet gargle now, throat shredding as he convulsed. His jaw dangled from the creature's claw for a moment before it flung it into the darkness like trash. Jake's face was a nightmare, teeth and tongue exposed in a gaping hole, blood streaming down his chest in rivers. He tried to crawl away again, but his strength was bleeding out of him with every drop. The creature pressed one clawed hand against his chest, pinning him flat to the floor. It leaned close, inhaling the scent of his exposed throat. Then, with deliberate cruelty, it slid its other claw through his abdomen. The claw pierced deep, spearing organs. Jake arched his back in agony as the creature stirred its claw like a knife through soup, shredding intestines, rupturing kidneys, ripping the stomach wall. Blood and bile poured out of him, soaking the straw in a blackened flood. His eyes bulged wide, pupils blown, body convulsing. The creature drew its claw upward in a long, tearing motion. Jake's abdomen opened like a curtain, guts spilling free. Loops of intestine plopped weightly onto the ground, his liver slithering out to join the heap. He screamed or tried to wear, bubbling through the hole where his jaw once was. The monster dipped its claw into his open body, hooked his spine, and pulled. There was a crack, like a tree splitting in half. Jake's body lifted slightly as his spine tore free from his torso, still connected by strips of meat. The sound of vertebrae popping echoed in the barn like firecrackers. The creature dangled the dripping spine above its head, letting Jake's twitching body flop limply on the floor like a gutted puppet. Blood cascaded from the gaping cavity where his backbone once was, flooding the ground around him. His eyes rolled back, limbs twitching in final, helpless spasms. It tossed the spine into the shadows where more glowing eyes waited. The others hissed in hunger, swarming to feast on the discarded remains. Jake was still alive, somehow, his body a hollowed husk. He twitched weakly, his torn mouth bubbling blood. His heart pounded visibly beneath the shredded cage of his ribs. The last defiant beat of a dying man. The creature wasn't finished. It crouched over him again and slid a claw between his ribs, cracking them one by one like brittle twigs. His chest burst open, ribs jutting outward like jagged wings. The heart, still beating frantically, throbbed in the center. Jake's bulging eyes locked on it in horror, as though he knew what was coming. The monster leaned down, opened its jaws wide, and sank its teeth into his still-beating heart. It ripped the organ free in a spray of blood and devoured it whole, chewing noisily, crimson pouring down its chin. Jake's body arched once, violently, then collapsed. His eyes froze wide, staring at the rafters, mouthless face dripping gore. The light left him, final and absolute. Silence fell in the barn. Only the wet chewing of the creatures in the shadows filled the night. The monster crouched over the ruin of Jake's body, licking every drop from its claws, savoring the last taste of human life. Outside, the desert was still. The dunes whispered with wind, hiding the screams that had soaked into the sand. By dawn, the barn would be empty. No trace of Jake or his friends would remain. Only the smell of blood, the stain of horror, and the knowledge that the desert keeps its nightmares and waits for the next travelers.
Please like and subscribe channel Fear Frequency for more horror stories. Thank you.